Hello, I have perfected Mafia 2 on Steam by collecting all 67 achievements from both versions of the game. This includes completing all the chapters, driving many vehicles, finding all the collectibles, and a lot more we'll touch on a bit later. Welcome to my full review. Mafia 2 is a story-focused, third-person, action-adventure shooter created in 2010, reimagined in 2020, being developed by Hangar 13 and published by 2K. Starting off with the settings, visually it's pretty simplistic with a nice backdrop of the city, nothing to really complain about. Controls hold your keybinds, aim assist, and sensitivity options, all pretty normal except your mouse sensitivity being forced on a low to high scale. You'll never really get a sense you're fully comfortable with unless you change your mouse's DPI. Not a fan. Game settings hold all your helpful options such as the unit and hint systems, subtitles, and the option to go from automatic to simulated driving, which I highly recommend choosing. The 2K launcher no longer exists, so this final option is literally useless. As for the video settings, everything here is pretty obvious, however I highly recommend using VSync and making sure your frames are limited to your monitors, assuming you have any issues. I'd also suggest checking these every time you boot up, as they like to undo themselves. Last but not least, the audio tab is nicely separated, and there's really nothing else to say about it. Both versions have controller support, so if you prefer that over mouse and keyboard, you should be good to go. As for the Steam Deck compatibility, the Definitive Edition is playable, yet the original is marked as unsupported. As for the technical side of things, please note I'm running this off a low to high-end PC, so how this performs for me might not perform the same for you. With that being said, both versions of the game have their own set of weird performance issues, some of which need fixed prior to even playing, or you'll have a miserable time. For the Definitive Edition, I had to block it in my firewall as the ads in the main menu just straight up crash my game. Regardless of the launcher being removed, this also makes achievements not always pop up until the game is closed. I also had an annoying issue where the game sets itself to my lowest res monitor. Regardless of the files I had set up, I had to unplug that monitor every single time I booted up the game. One major issue that carried across both games is VSync must be forced on through NVIDIA's control panel. Your frame rate matters a lot here, and anything above native can cause screen tearing, freezing, spawning in walls, random teleports, game crashes, and whatever else it wants to throw at you. With that being said, even after everything was fixed, both games would still randomly crash after a couple of hours of playing. Now if you have or had any of these annoying issues, I will post a PGW link down below that goes over every noted issue and how to fix it. Huge thanks to Void for showing this to me and solving most of my issues. As for the difficulty, there are 3 options: easy, medium, and hard. The only noticeable differences between them come down to how much damage you take and how fast you regenerate health. Hard also makes enemies not appear on your radar, but I rarely use it during fights anyway. The main game is entirely story focused, holding your hand all the way through, while also providing some freedom in doing what you want outside of the missions. On the difficulty scale, I would give it a solid medium. Even on the hardest difficulty, the game's pretty much a breeze. I only really struggled with crashing into objects and a few silly deaths. As for its replayability, there is a decent amount. I've played through both versions years ago, but had a blast re-going through the story, gathering all the naughty collectibles, and completing the extra DLC chasing achievements. That said, I think a single full completion of the story is more than enough to satisfy most players, and replaying is not necessary. There's also a chapter selection you can use after completion that allows you to start a new save point at any given point, very helpful for achievement hunting. As for the gameplay, in short, Mafia 2 is a driving, story-focused, third-person shooter set in an open world played in the city of Empire Bay, which is based off multiple real-life cities during the 1940s to 50s. The entire gameplay revolves around shooting bad, maybe good guys, and driving your car literally everywhere. Starting from the beginning, the first 2 chapters are pretty much the tutorial, teaching you the controls, how to shoot, drive, so forth, all while setting up the story. As for the combat, the vast majority of your time will be loud with some type of gun. However, melee is quite strong and even required for some of the missions. This provides that stealthier approach to gameplay for those who prefer it, but while it is helpful to punch around, the enemy's line of sight can be extremely unfair. The only other downside to it is with it feeling very prolonged when the enemy just doesn't swing at you. The guns all feel incredible and most are insanely accurate while behind cover or standing still, regardless of what your crosshair tells you. The crosshair will change depending on the gun you're using and gives you a rough idea on how accurate your next shot will be. However, some guns like the Tommy has a wide spread but is still pinpoint accurate when behind cover. The crosshair will not adjust to that, and sometimes this is quite frustrating to notice. As for the driving, it is insanely well done, unique, and a real pain all in one. Compared to the first game's driving, which I didn't review, I'm sorry, it is a huge one-up. The first game felt a bit rough around the edges, while Mafia 2's is very smooth, floaty, and sim-like. You really get a feel for the car you're driving, not to mention every unique car handles slightly differently. The base experience is way more than enough to get behind, but if you change your settings into the simulated one, your car will sometimes feel on ice, but overall it's a much better experience. The mechanics are insanely detailed to the point if your car is damaged enough, it'll affect your steering. Also, if you knock out your engine, you must get out of your car to fix it. I absolutely love the driving, however the painful part comes with the cars feeling like they're delayed, for lack of a better term. It takes a bit to understand how your car turns, drives, and simply just works. It's a bit confusing, but once you get it, and you'll be having joyrides across the world. As for the view models, I stuck on the generic behind the car one, but if you've ever wanted to watch your tires, now you can with the wheel cam. While I originally thought this was some random joke, it's here to show off how much detail the tires actually have. You can watch them deform, deflate, and even watch your hubcap pop off. It's a nice little touch, a bit less detailed than the definitive, but cool regardless. As for the collectibles, you'll mostly find two things. Playboy magazines, which show exactly what you'd expect. No, I'm not showing you. And are mostly found throughout the chapters with some in the open world. Fun fact, they're actually all taken from real life covers, and Playboy wasn't technically invented at the time Mafia 2 takes place, so a time traveler must have brought them back. Wanted posters are the second collectible, which are all mostly found on buildings in alleyways. These were the easiest to find and can be collected at any time. Now there are 69 magazines, nice, and 159 wanted posters with 30 added in the definitive edition, all of which I collected twice. Finding the last few without a guide is quite infuriating. I eventually gave in as the game doesn't help you in the slightest. Without a mapped guide, this collectathon can be quite miserable. Now if we compare the first game's definitive, I'm insanely glad the foxes were replaced with adult magazines, but the only collectible I wish 2 took into consideration was the hidden away vehicles. I absolutely love doing the postcard puzzles and eventually finding a new sick ride. Mafia says it's all about owning nice things, and yet there isn't really many nice things here to own. As for the DLCs, there are 3, and are now freely provided with any modern purchase of the game. The first 2 are based around a new protagonist named Jimmy and his history of being a tough gun for hire. While the final DLC puts you in control of Joe doing all his odd jobs while Vito was in prison. Compared to the main story, these DLCs take an entirely different arcadic approach with timers, floating icons, and very lame text for cutscenes. It was pretty clear very quickly that these DLCs were most likely just a cash grab or wanting to test the waters on newer, less polished mechanics, as all of them were pretty lackluster. You get one quick lick of story and then you're thrown into the open world and expected to complete a range of timed side missions. Once you've done the first few, you've pretty much completed them all. They just keep repeating and prolonging your pain with different locations or longer rides. I've tried to understand why Jimmy exists, but nothing about his DLC screams the Mafia I just played. It is completely soulless. Extremely disappointing, but if 2K was struggling that much back then, it sadly makes sense why they chose to cash grab an insanely well-loved game. Sad, but it is what it is. Moving into the wonderfully open world of Mafia 2. Visually, it's insanely well made, immersive, and absolutely holds up in today's games. While I might not contest the detail of GTA, the Mafia series so far sits high up on my list. Mafia 2's world is a massive fictional city called Empire Bay, which takes a lot of inspiration from real-life New York, alongside weapons, cars, books, you name it. While the original Mafia's world is larger than 2's, it had a lot of empty space and forestry thrown about. 2's world, however, is nicely compact and separated into a thriving city with multiple different districts, lifestyles, seasons, and technical advancements over the years. That being said, a lot of the city is not accessible. You sadly can't walk into any building or throw yourself off every bridge. Sad, I know, but you can, however, visit many body shops, gun shops, gas stations, diners, and clothing stores to do exactly what you'd expect. A cool bonus to the body and clothing shops is they can be used to get rid of your wanted level. Completely useless in the story mode, however the DLC takes huge advantage over them by not resetting your wanted level when going into missions. Missed opportunity for the hard difficulty to do this. As for travel, you traverse the world on foot or by vehicle. While the choice is mostly yours, the vast majority of gameplay is done while driving, as it should be. Overall, the world is insanely immersive, and I was dumbfounded replaying through both versions, noticing all the details. I was also shocked when I noticed the vast amount missing from the definitive edition. That said, there is so much small detail and effort put into the world itself that you just have to respect it. As for comparing the two, the definitive edition will win most arguments outside of performance. It's incredibly gorgeous, and if you've never played the original, this is a great one to pick up. However, if you don't care about graphics and want something more raw, go with the original. I noticed there's a lot of smaller details removed or tweaked for the definitive edition. The 2 examples I'll use are those that bothered me the most, the first being clothing, specifically any jacket or trench coat. In the original they have full physics, however in the definitive the bottoms are glued right to your legs. Weirdly this is fixed in the DLC, but if you didn't notice this prior, I'm sure it's fine, it just ruins immersion. Speaking of which, the other detail is the eyeballs. They are a lot less cared for in the definitive, with a lot of cutscenes having characters just stare randomly in an awkward direction. Not to nitpick too much as there's many more, but playing the versions back to back really makes me wonder if the missing details were overlooked or they just ran out of time before release. Anyway, as for the audio, they did an absolute incredible job with it. The world is constantly alive, the soundtrack fits the theme perfectly, and there was never a dull moment that sounded out of place. Speaking of the soundtrack, it is filled to the brim with over 100 songs, all by the original artists, with around half of them being composed by the Mafia 2's orchestral score. There's also no streamer mode, so if you create unfiltered content, I wish you the best of luck. The overall audio is as immersive as it comes, right down to the windows being opened, making the outdoor racket much louder. It is insanely impressive what they pulled off back then. The voice acting is also top notch, with the entire cast playing their characters to a T. It's almost a little weird when you sort of feel like you're there, always eavesdropping on the conversations being had. While your character does talk back, you have no choice but to sit there and listen. It's almost rude not to. The only downside with the audio is dialogues randomly repeating themselves too frequently. I'm sure most characters have a selection of randomized audio they can say, but once you're the same line back to back 4 to 5 times in the same mission, you start to question a bit. It's funny, but can ruin your immersion. It's funny, but can ruin your immersion. Hey, you made it to the story section and my thoughts on it. I won't be covering the spoilers in depth, but if you would like to avoid them, skip ahead to the positive and negative section below. Ready? Okay. Set a decade after the first game, taking place between 1945 and 51 within the city of Empire Bay. You play as Vito Scaletta, a young mobster and war veteran who was sent home on leave only to return home and find out about the debt his father left on his family. Reuniting with your best friend Joe, only to then get sucked into the middle of a city divided by 3 mafia families, all while attempting to pay it back and secure yourself and family a better lifestyle, layered with the self-promise of never going broke again. Now, I really enjoyed the story. It's very easy to understand what is going on, why you're doing what you're doing, how it's affecting those around you, and just your overall plot in the city. I thought it was a fairly smooth and fun experience across the board. However, after doing a little more research on a plotline I wanted to complain about, it seems the problems with the story rise once you start digging past its face value. Allegedly, a lot of content was planned for release that was cut prior due to time constraints and console limitations. If true, it's only fair not to complain about it, as it would pretty much sum up my complaints of parts feeling a bit rushed or underexplained. Some time frames just don't really add up, but that's a-okay. Now, I absolutely love the moment it crosses over with the original Mafia cutscene. While it is sad, it brings me so much joy seeing the attention to detail and keeping the story forever going in this fictional world. I say fictional as the game obviously incorporates a lot of elements during that organized crime era and historically accurate visuals, for the most part. So while the characters can closely resemble real-life Mafia figures, the plot and character interactions are all fictional and blended up perfectly to create a fun, engaging narrative experience for us to enjoy. As for the ending, it's clearly meant to be upsetting. It's left ambiguous for a reason and most likely a cliffhanger for Mafia 3, which I'll also review before the old country. What it does show is you both messed up and there's not always such thing as loyalty in this business. Joe had every right to betray you, but somehow chose not to, then decided to help you out in the end, only to then be separated once again with what we can assume is 2 different deals, or the death of Joe for failing his hit on you. There is no such thing as a good end outside of death once you live in this Mafia world, and I love to see how they played with that. I thought this was a perfect note to end the game on, and as much as I hate cliffhangers, Mafia is my only exception, and I'm excited to see where this ending goes, if anywhere. As mentioned before, there are a total of 67 achievements, 134 across both versions, all of which took me a total of 69 hours to obtain. Nice. With a single playthrough taking around 10. I will not be mentioning the ones handed to you just by playing, however let's start with the more missable ones, such as Dream Handling, where you must tune your car to the max. This can only be done in a certain chapter or within the DLCs, as you will never have the money required otherwise. The Professional is to obtain ration stamps without raising the alarm. This one was quite confusing, but involves exploring the bank until you find the power switch to turn off said alarm. It's not really hinted at until it's too late, and even then, it's in a weird spot to find. Explorer, where you must drive a total of 1,000 miles in Jimmy's DLC. This is the most obnoxious achievement in the entire game, maybe even the franchise. You can complete the entire DLC in around 5 hours and only drive close to maybe 90 miles. Once I found out it would take around 40 hours in a maxed out car driving in a DLC with no content, I gave in and cheated the achievement by using someone else's save state and only having to drive a few miles. I'm all for the grind, but doing this twice in a DLC that doesn't provide enough to care about would drive anyone insane. This might be the most unfun achievement I've ever come across in a game so far. The hardest achievement award will be going to Jack of All Trades. where you must do 10 different score actions in one mission within Joe's DLC. What makes this achievement hard is remembering everything you have to do and then praying the achievement pops once you're done. In one timed mission, you must get a score by drifting, speeding, hitting a ramp, getting a vehicle kill, killing with every throwable, body shot, headshot, and a melee kill. This can be done on any mission, but there are obviously a few that make this a lot easier. Now let's go over some of the positives. The driving mechanics are immaculate. The law system provides a nice threat. Lots of dark and adult rated themes, which is rare to see nowadays. And the plot at face value is wonderful, even crosses over from the first game while not needing to have played it. As for the negatives, both versions have a lot of modern technical performance issues on PC. As good as the driving is, there's a lot of it with no time skips. The DLCs are extremely disappointing, and while the open world is quite large and covered with collectibles, most of the map is plain and inaccessible, which can make exploring feel boring and useless. As for a neutral, the Definitive Edition feels more like an HD texture pack than it does a reimagination. Yes, it looks gorgeous, but at the cost of losing some immersive attention to detail that made the original so great. I know it's not that big of a deal to most, as you get a prettier version, but honestly the original still holds up in today's visual standards and even has a lot less tech issues. I'd recommend starting there unless you truly prefer the visuals. In conclusion, Mafia 2 is a driving, story-focused, third-person shooter. But would I recommend it? Well, Mafia 2 is currently available for 30 Canadian doll hairs, or your regional equivalent on the Steam, PlayStation, and Xbox storefronts, all of which also include the original. Now while I absolutely love this series, if you're looking to give them a try, I highly recommend waiting for the Trilogy bundle to go on sale. It's currently available for 65 doll hairs, but almost always goes on sale for around 15. This gets you all 3 Mafia games with the respectable DLCs. A win-win. I think it's obvious, but I highly recommend giving it a try if you've had any interest in it whatsoever. I also think it's only fair I start my rating with Mafia 5.6. Mafia 2 5.5 out of 6. Thank you for watching if you made it this far. Let me know your thoughts down below, or what game I should complete next. Subscribe so you never miss a video, and until next time, take care.